culture shock for you whenever you went to college?
That a school as woke as UC Berkeley has a lot of underlying racism and unconscious or conscious racial biases. Story time: when I was going through the Greek rush process for the sororities, I felt like a lot of the girls were just not seeing me because I wasn't white. You know when you can just tell that they're not interested in you and they didn't really care about what you had to say? That's kind of how I felt. It's really unfortunate because I had a lot of things in common with these girls, whether it's from Southern California. I clearly have a Valley girl accent. I felt like I was trying to prove my whiteness to them versus some girl who's from the middle of nowhere. They had no problem giving their time of day. And for the first time in my life, I felt really bad about myself, which I shouldn't have, and a lot of my POC friends felt the same way. Which is why I dropped the process. The funniest part of the story is that a lot of the same girls will reach out to me on LinkedIn asking for job referrals because they like where I work, trying to mingle with me in class, telling them, oh, I should rush for Greek life, I would be a perfect fit, they love my social media and TikTok, they want to be an influencer too. It's funny how things change when I had value for you and you realize I'm not so different from you. Because I did rush, you just didn't care or listen.
Was a culture shock for you whenever you went to college?
So when my friends graduated high school, right, they went to like big universities and they were talking to me about how there's so much school spirit, how there's so much engagement with professors. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. I wanted to save some money. So I went to a community college, which is totally fine. The only thing is, it's not high school. Like no one told me that when you get to community college, you're a fucking adult. Like, and I didn't get that memo because I was late to my first class, right? And I was like, Professor Davis, I am so sorry. I promise you I'll never be late again. He looked at me in the windows of my soul and said, my name's Gerald. I was like, oh, fuck. Then I was in a group project, right? My classmate who was in his late 40s, right? He was like, you're going to get your side of the work done or else I'm going to fight you in the parking lot. I'm like, I'm a child. You know what I mean? Like, and then I went to my counselor. I'm like, I want to go to a big school like UCLA. She laughed at me and then I left. Then I got my iPhone stolen. So life, you know, like, but yeah.
Was a culture shock for you whenever you went to college?
So my friend group is predominantly people of color, and we were talking about whether or not you use a washcloth or a loofah in the shower. And then obviously we were all like, yeah, the fuck, like it's nasty if you don't. And then we found out that most white people don't. They just rub the soap on and then they just rinse it. And I was like, oh, no wonder they smell like quarters when it rains.
Was a culture shock for you whenever you went to college?
The weather. White people and the weather. I attended predominantly black schools growing up, and the next highest racial groups were Latinos and Asians, so I didn't know a lot of white kids growing up at all. Now, I attend a PWI. I'm surrounded by them. I get a little scared sometimes because they be scary. White people are weird. Anyways, the weather. Back home, if I wasn't sure how it was feeling outside, because it's Virginia, 60 degrees don't necessarily mean 60 degrees, and one day it could be 60 and the next day it's 20. If I'm not sure how the weather is, I could just look out my window at my neighbors and I will know what I should be wearing to go outside. I can't do that here. I can't do that here. And you know why I can't do that here? I will leave this room with 2 pairs of pants on, an undershirt, a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, my jacket, my coat zipped up, a scarf, headscarf, and a hat, and a mask, and still be cold. These white people at the same time will be out here in shorts. Shorts.
Was a culture shock for you whenever you went to college?
The assumption that because my parents weren't rich, that they didn't work long or hard hours. I went to a very bougie school in New England with a lot of, I'm not rich, my parents are rich types. And there were a lot of times that I had rich friends tell me, well, at least, even though you were poor, like, at least your parents were around all the time. Like, I grew up rich, but, like, my parents were always working. Excuse me? My parents were always working, too. My dad had a 2-hour commute so that my siblings could live close to family in a better school district. My mom was a public school teacher who was also a tutor, taught summer school every summer, tutored after school, was a coach on top of that to make more money. Just because my parents were underpaid does not mean that they were underworked. And like, just because your parents were overpaid doesn't mean they worked harder or longer than my parents. No te equivoques conmigo, mi amor. Don't get it twisted with me, love, because I was such a straight. Like, I really can't believe the amount of times people told me that in college.
Was a culture shock for you whenever you went to college?
So I grew up in Utah, and being one of few black people in Utah, I didn't think anything could be as big as a culture shock as that. But now I'm a third-year student at UC Berkeley, and I can say that I've been explicitly discriminated against more in my past 3 years than I ever did 18 years growing up in Utah. The first was my literal first day in the Bay Area. I was riding the bus and somebody said, "Shut up, Ensler." And then I would go to the dining halls my freshman year and people would actively move away from me and like sit nowhere near me I would go to lectures that were like 2,000 plus students, and I would be one of few, if not the only black kid, and nobody would sit next to me. I've been attacked for calling people out for being racist or saying the N-word. There's just so many things that's happened, and you think it wouldn't happen at a woke university like Berkeley, but it does.
Was a culture shock for you whenever you went to college?
Okay, yeah, I can talk about this. So I'm from a small town on the border between the United States and Mexico, but I got accepted to study fine art at a PWI in my state. And since I've moved, I've had a few interesting experiences regarding my ethnicity, but one that I can talk about right now is when I told my old boss at the art museum I used to work at. I told her that I'm from the border, and she looked at me with like this super shocked face. She said, "Oh, is it really that bad over there?" And that surprised the hell out of me because it's a super safe town, but it made me realize for the first time that people really do have these misconceptions about the border. They think it's like this terrible, dangerous place, when in reality, there's so much beauty and culture here. So that inspired me to do this painting series. You can see the paintings behind me, in which I reclaim the border and I show its beauty and its culture to people who aren't familiar. So I guess that's a happy ending, right?
Was a culture shock for you whenever you went to college? I'll start.
So I go to the University of Notre Dame, go Irish. That school is like hella white people, and I grew up in a city in Southern California that is 80% Hispanic Latino population. So, I grew up I grew up around a lot of culture per se, whatever. White people, don't dance at parties. Like, I was so confused. I would go to a party and they'd be playing like party dance music, like any type of music. Even at some parties, they'd be playing Spanish music and nobody would be dancing. They would literally just stand around jumping, and I would be so confused.
Was a culture shock for you whenever you went to college?
It was definitely learning that I grew up low income. Like, up until college, I thought that I grew up in an entire middle class family. And then I started having classmates that like actually had coin, or making friends with people who were actually middle class. And I realized like I didn't grow up like either of these. Shout out to my parents though. I didn't grow up feeling like I lacked anything.
Was a culture shock for you whenever you went to college?
Okay, this might be really dumb, really dumb, but I thought all my teachers at my HBC would be black.
Was a culture shock for you whenever you went to college? I'll start.
Where do I begin? So I go to UC Berkeley with a 1.9% black population. So I can do a whole series on this, but let's start with my freshman year. If you go to UC Berkeley, I lived in Foothill, which is basically the dorm for all the physics, engineering majors. I was like pretty much the only black person who lived there. So when I would be in the dorm, people would run away. Like, I'm being serious. I would be in my pajamas, going to the dining hall, trying to get breakfast before class, and kids would just be like trying to avoid me, even though I have a Cal keychain, and how the hell would I get into the dorm this early in the morning if I didn't go to UC Berkeley? So yeah, if I sat in the dining hall, they would literally move away from where I'm sitting. It was like a whole ass movie. And yeah, I had to transfer out of there.
Dear best friend, I'm so lucky to have you in my life. You accept me at my worst, and you make me feel amazing at my best. We have inside jokes that no one else but us will understand. And when I fall, you laugh, but you're always there to pick me back up. You get my ugliest selfies. Despite how smart we are, we're stupid together, and that's okay. I could be with you for hours and never get bored. You're irreplaceable. You're my other half.
Was a culture shock for you whenever you went to college?
I'm waiting for this moment. So I grew up in Sonoma County, about an hour out of San Francisco, California. I went to school, University of Texas, Hookham in Austin. Our first day of orientation, I'm sitting at this table with a couple of other kids, and this guy asks me where I'm from. And I tell him. The table gets really quiet, and this girl looks at me and goes, "Do you know any gay people?" And I looked at her and I was like, yeah. At the time, I didn't know I was gay, by the way. But I was like, yeah, of course, I have gay kids at my school. And she looked at me and goes, you have gay kids at your school? And I was like, yes. And she goes, do they bus them in from San Francisco? And I said, I'm sorry, what? And she was like, oh, because Gay people only live in San Francisco, so do they bus them to your school and back every day for them to be there? My first day of school in Texas, they thought that gay people only existed in San Francisco. It was a long year.